The ugly daughter was sent to the prince as a joke, but ended up stealing his heart. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The winter fog hung over Whitmore Manor like an old secret. The halls were cold that morning, though laughter echoed from the drawing room, bright and cruel. Eleanor Whitmore stood just beyond the doorway, her gloved hands clasped tightly, listening to her sister's mirth spill into the air like broken glass. "They say Prince Alexander seeks a bride again," said Caroline, the eldest, her smile as sharp as the pins in her hair. "He sent word to half the noble houses. Imagine, Eleanor, perhaps you might apply if they're willing to lower the standards of beauty this year." Lydia, the younger and prettier sister, laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "The prince would faint at first sight of her. They'd have to revive him with the scent of my perfume." Eleanor tried to step away unnoticed, but Lord Pembroke's voice stopped her. He was a guest that day, a friend of her father's and a man who enjoyed cruelty as others enjoyed wine. "No, no," he said, raising a hand, his tone full of mock admiration. "Miss Eleanor has her charms, modest ones hidden perhaps under layers of grey, but charms nonetheless. Why not send her portrait to London? The court could use a little amusement." The room erupted in laughter. Her mother smiled faintly, saying nothing. Only her father, Lord Whitmore, frowned, though not for her sake. "Pembroke," he said lightly, "you jest too far." But the nobleman had already found his idea too delightful to abandon. "No jest at all, my lord. Imagine the prince receiving a proposal from your plain daughter. The whole of London would be entertained for weeks." Eleanor stood still. The sting of their laughter should have driven her away, yet she could not move. Perhaps some part of her hoped anyone would say enough, but no one did. Pembroke's laughter softened into a calculating smile. "In fact," he continued, "why stop at a portrait? Let the young lady herself deliver it. The court loves novelty, and the prince is fond of charity." Lydia clapped her hands together, delighted. "Oh yes, let Eleanor present herself. We could say she has long admired him from afar." Her mother waved a fan lazily. "That would be cruel, Lydia." "Cruel?" Pembroke laughed. "It would be a story, and I dare say it might earn you favour, my lady. His Highness would see that Whitmore Manor possesses both wit and obedience." Caroline tilted her head toward Eleanor. "Do not look so stricken, sister. You should be grateful. Few women receive the chance to meet a prince even as a jest." Eleanor managed to find her voice at last. "And if he laughs?" Pembroke's smile deepened. "Then you will have served your purpose well, Miss Whitmore. Every court needs its laughter." That night, in her small chamber under the eaves, Eleanor sat by the dying fire, staring at the cracked mirror on her dressing table. The face reflected there was pale and quiet, unremarkable but steady. Her sister's beauty had always been their armor. Her own silence was hers. She heard footsteps in the corridor. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, appeared with a candle. "Child," the woman said softly, "don't listen to their nonsense." Eleanor tried to smile. "They only speak what everyone thinks." "Then let the world think," Mrs. Holloway murmured. "You've more heart than all of them together." She paused, then added gently, "The carriage leaves at dawn." Eleanor's hand froze on the table. "Then it's decided?" "Your father signed the letter himself." Eleanor nodded once, feeling something quiet settle inside her. So be it. When dawn came, the manor was still asleep. A thin frost clung to the windows as she stepped outside, her single trunk loaded into the waiting carriage. No one had come to bid her farewell, except Mrs. Holloway, wrapped in her shawl, tears shining in her eyes. "Hold your head high, my dear," the woman whispered, pressing a small prayer book into Eleanor's hands. "The world changes when kindness walks through its doors." Eleanor tried to answer, but found no words. The carriage jolted forward, wheels crunching on the frozen gravel. As Whitmore Manor disappeared into the mist, she whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. I will not." The road to London stretched long and grey. She travelled in silence, passing villages where smoke rose gently from chimneys, and children ran beside the carriage, calling out greetings she barely heard. The journey gave her time to think, too much time. She remembered how her sisters would steal glances at mirrors, how her mother measured worth by invitations and compliments, how Lord Pembroke's smirk had turned her into a spectacle. She had been invisible for years. Now she was a joke, dressed in travelling clothes. Yet beneath her fear, something unexpected stirred, a strange calm. If this was humiliation, then she would endure it with dignity. They could take her pride, but not her composure. By the third day, the fog thickened, and the city's outline rose from it like a mirage, London sprawling and alive. The carriage crossed cobblestone streets lined with gas lamps, their glow blurring in the mist. Her escort, a stone-faced footman sent by Pembroke, announced they had reached the royal residence. The palace loomed vast and distant, its towers lost in the clouds. Eleanor's breath caught as the gates opened, and the carriage rolled into a courtyard filled with laughter, voices, and the glimmer of carriages arriving for the winter ball. She had been told she was to deliver her family's letter and be presented briefly, then dismissed. But now, watching the shimmering gowns and golden uniforms, she sensed something more. This was no simple introduction. It was a spectacle she had been sent to entertain. The footman opened the carriage door. "Miss Whitmore," he said flatly, offering his hand. Her heart pounded. She stepped down carefully, clutching her small reticule. Around her, the noble guests barely concealed their curiosity. Someone whispered, "That's her, the plain one from Kent." A young lady in a crimson gown giggled behind her fan. "Poor creature. I hope she knows she's tonight's diversion." Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked toward the marble staircase. Inside, the ballroom shimmered like a vision. Crystal chandeliers, soft music, silks swirling under candlelight. For a moment she felt small, lost among colors and laughter. Then a herald's voice rose above the hum. "Miss Eleanor Whitmore, daughter of Lord and Lady Whitmore of Kent." The music faltered. Heads turned. A ripple of amusement passed through the crowd. Eleanor felt it like heat against her skin. She moved forward slowly, her steps measured, her face calm. At the far end of the hall, near the grand staircase, stood Prince Alexander. He was taller than she expected. His dark hair swept neatly back, his expression unreadable. Beside him, courtiers waited for his reaction. Eleanor curtsied deeply. "Your Highness." Alexander inclined his head politely. "Miss Whitmore, welcome to London." The crowd waited. They expected laughter, dismissal, perhaps a cruel remark. Instead, the prince said quietly, "You have traveled far. Would you honor me with a dance?" A stunned silence followed. Even Eleanor looked up in disbelief. "Your Highness," she murmured, "I fear I am not skilled in such graces." He offered his arm. "Then we shall both learn." The orchestra hesitated, then resumed. As they began to move, Eleanor focused on her breathing, her hands trembling slightly in his. She had never danced in such company, yet Alexander guided her gently. His tone was courteous but curious. "Tell me," he said, "did you come willingly?" Her gaze flickered toward the watching crowd. "Does it matter, Your Highness?" "It matters to me." She hesitated, then answered softly, "Then no. But one cannot refuse a summons wrapped in duty." He studied her face as they turned through the steps. "You do not strike me as a woman easily commanded." "Then perhaps you have not met many women, Your Highness." A quiet chuckle escaped him, and a few nearby courtiers exchanged puzzled glances. They could not hear the words, only see the strange ease between them. When the music ended, she stepped back, bowing slightly. The prince inclined his head again, but his eyes lingered, thoughtful. She moved to the edge of the room, hoping to disappear among the guests, but whispers followed her like shadows. She heard her name, soft and cruel, mingled with laughter. Plain as porridge. Can you believe he actually danced with her? Perhaps pity is fashionable now. Her hands trembled, but she refused to look down. She turned toward an alcove near the doors, where she could breathe unseen. The air there was cool and still. Behind her the laughter rose again, and she caught a phrase that froze her blood. "Lord Pembroke was right. The prince's charity knows no bounds." A man's voice answered, half amused. "He'll have to wash the pity off his gloves." Eleanor pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. She wanted to run, to hide, but pride kept her rooted. They had sent her here to be humiliated, and she would not give them the pleasure of watching her break. She drew a slow breath and whispered to herself, "They may laugh, but I will not give them my shame." A voice came from the shadows behind her. "Did you know this was all a jest?" She turned sharply. Prince Alexander stood there, his face half in light, half in shadow, the faintest trace of anger in his eyes. Eleanor froze where she stood, her breath catching. The prince's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The candles from the ballroom spilled faint light across his face, revealing eyes that searched her with unnerving honesty. "I knew," she said at last. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. Or rather, I suspected. It was not difficult to see the amusement in their eyes when I left Kent. Alexander's jaw tightened. "And still you came?" "I was sent, Your Highness," she replied simply. "When one's family commands, obedience is the only grace left." He studied her. Most would have refused or wept. "I have done both in other rooms," she said, a faint curve to her lips. "But not here. Not before them." A silence stretched between them. Somewhere behind, the music had begun again, the court resuming its glittering rhythm as if nothing had happened. He looked at her hands, steady, folded neatly before her. "You are either very brave," he murmured, "or very proud." "Perhaps both," she said, "though pride rarely serves women well." His eyes softened for an instant, but then the mask returned. "You will remain a few days at court. My sister, Princess Charlotte, is in need of a companion. You may attend her until I decide what is proper to do next." Eleanor inclined her head. "As Your Highness commands." When she turned to leave, he stopped her once more. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "do not think I share their amusement." She paused, uncertain. "Then why invite me to stay?" "Because," he said almost to himself, "I cannot decide what I see when I look at you." She did not answer. She curtsied and walked away before her trembling knees betrayed her. By morning, the gossip had spread through every corridor. The prince's dance with the plain girl from Kent was the scandal of the hour. Servants whispered it in the halls. Noble ladies laughed over breakfast. Eleanor, now lodged in a small guest room overlooking the gardens, heard it all. When Princess Charlotte sent for her, she expected another form of ridicule, but the young princess, barely 16, greeted her with warmth. "So you're the one who made my brother forget himself," she said with a mischievous grin. "I must thank you for that. He's been far too serious lately." Eleanor managed a small smile. "I fear I did not intend such an effect." "That is precisely why you did," Charlotte said cheerfully. "Everyone here intends something. It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't." From that moment, Eleanor's days found rhythm. She read aloud to the princess, wrote letters at her dictation, and helped arrange small gatherings for the royal charities. Her quiet patience made her a favorite among the staff, though it irritated certain ladies who enjoyed watching newcomers falter. One afternoon, while Eleanor sorted correspondence in the library, a group of noblewomen entered. Their perfume reached her before their voices did. "Look at her," whispered Lady Travers, the tallest of them, her tone dripping with disdain. "The prince's little charity project." Another laughed softly. "Do you think she practices gratitude in the mirror?" Eleanor did not turn. She continued arranging the letters, her hands calm, her heart less so. "Perhaps we should all arrive uninvited and plain," said the third. "It seems to attract attention." Before Eleanor could reply, another voice cut through the mockery. "Attention, perhaps," said Alexander from the doorway, "but not admiration. That is earned." The women spun around, startled. The prince stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Ladies," he said coolly, "if you have so much leisure for cruelty, I must question whether your households are well managed." They curtsied, muttered apologies, and retreated, faces burning. When they were gone, he turned to Eleanor. "Do they often speak to you so?" "Only when they forget I have ears," she said lightly. His lips twitched. "You take their insults well." "I take them as reminders, Your Highness. They remind me who I am and who I am not." He leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "And who is that, Miss Whitmore?" "A guest who must not forget she is temporary." He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to read beyond her words. "You are the first person I have met here who does not pretend. It unsettles me." "I assure you, Your Highness, that is not my intention." "Perhaps not," he said, "but you do it nonetheless." Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long. Then he straightened. "My sister speaks well of you. Continue to do as you have. London may yet learn that sincerity has its own kind of beauty." When he left, Eleanor sat back, her hands trembling. She did not know if his words were kindness or danger. The days passed, and with each one the prince's gaze seemed to find her more easily. In council, in corridors, in the gardens, always that brief glance, curious and uncertain. Rumors began again, quieter this time, whispered under breath. One evening a formal dinner was held in the West Hall. The table glittered with silver and wine, and conversation moved like quicksilver. Eleanor sat near the end, beside the princess, her place chosen carefully to keep her distant from the prince. But fate, or perhaps mischief, had other plans. A servant stumbled, spilling a cup of wine that rolled crimson across the table toward Eleanor's lap. She rose quickly, reaching for a napkin. Before she could react further, Alexander was already there, offering his handkerchief. The room fell silent. "Allow me," he said, his voice steady but his expression sharp, too sharp for simple courtesy. "Thank you, Your Highness," she murmured, taking the cloth. He lingered for a moment longer than decorum allowed, and when he returned to his seat, conversation resumed awkwardly, like a carriage with a broken wheel. After the dinner, Eleanor escaped into the corridor for air. The laughter and music behind her felt distant, unreal. She walked toward the balcony, needing space to breathe. The night was cool, the gardens below washed in moonlight. She gripped the railing and closed her eyes. Somewhere behind her she heard footsteps. Running from the court already? She turned. It was the prince. "I needed air," she said softly. "So did I," he replied. "It grows suffocating in there." Too many smiles without meaning. "They mean what they think you wish to hear," she said. "And you?" "I mean what I believe," he smiled faintly. "And what do you believe tonight, Miss Whitmore?" "That kindness is wasted on spectacle." He studied her face, the faint moonlight tracing her features. "You think I was kind to you for spectacle? I think you were kind despite it." He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing. "You have no fear of speaking plainly." "You command honesty," she said, her voice low. "You should not be surprised when it comes to you." The air seemed to still. For a moment, the prince looked as though he might say something more. But a sound from the doorway, laughter, approaching footsteps, broke the spell. He drew back, his tone returning to formality. "Return to the hall soon," he said. "They already whisper enough." When he left, she leaned against the railing, her pulse unsteady. She had seen in his eyes something neither pity nor amusement. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Later that week, the whispers turned to rumors. Someone claimed the prince visited her chambers. Another swore she had bewitched him. Eleanor ignored them, but she felt the eyes that followed her wherever she went. One morning, as she dressed to attend the princess, a folded paper was slipped beneath her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it, frowning. "Leave while you still can. They mean to ruin you. No signature, no seal, just the warning written in haste." Her breath caught. She looked toward the window, where frost still clung to the glass. The message could have been a cruel trick, or something worse. At breakfast, she studied every face in the room, searching for guilt, for knowledge. Lady Travers smirked as she passed, but that was nothing new. Lord Pembroke, newly arrived at court, bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly, "London suits you. I trust you find the air more refined than in Kent." "Refinement is not always improvement, my lord," she answered. He laughed, pleased by her spirit. "You've learned a tongue since last we met. Careful. Sharp words can wound as deeply as dull looks." The princess frowned. "Lord Pembroke, that was unkind." He shrugged lightly and moved on. Eleanor's hands clenched around her napkin. There it was again. That name, that sneer. Pembroke, the root of the jest, the one who had started it all. As the day wore on, she felt the tension in the air tighten, invisible but heavy. Courtiers watched her as though waiting for something to happen. By evening, she could bear it no longer. She returned to her chamber and locked the door. There upon her desk lay another folded note. No seal, no name, just the same handwriting. "The truth follows you. Leave before it finds you." Her pulse quickened. She tore the paper into pieces and tossed it into the fire. But the flames did not comfort her. What truth, what shadow from her past could still matter? When the embers faded, she sat in darkness, listening to the faint hum of laughter beyond her door. She had learned to endure mockery, but this unseen threat was different. She did not hear the soft knock at first. When it came again, Firmer this time. She rose and opened the door. It was Alexander. "You look pale," he said quietly. "Has someone troubled you?" She shook her head. "No more than usual, Your Highness." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Do not hide the truth from me." Eleanor hesitated, then handed him the first note she had kept. "I received this. I thought it a jest, but now—" He read it, his expression darkening. "Who sent this?" "I do not know." He folded the paper slowly. "Someone wishes to drive you away. That alone tells me you have more power here than you realize." "I have none, Your Highness." "Then why does your presence shake them?" Before she could answer, a sudden knock echoed on the door again, urgent, commanding. A servant's voice called out, "Your Highness, the council requests you immediately. There has been a matter raised concerning Miss Whitmore's family." Alexander turned sharply toward the door, his face hardening. Eleanor's voice trembled. "My family?" He looked at her, eyes full of warning. "Stay in this room until I return. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her heart thudded painfully. The door closed behind him, and she sank into the chair, staring at the fire that no longer warmed the room. Outside, in the grand council chamber, the murmurs of noble voices swelled as the prince entered. Upon the table lay a sealed document bearing her father's name. The seal broke with a crack, and silence fell. A single phrase could be seen across the parchment, Lord Whitmore's signature upon an act of rebellion. The murmur in the council chamber was like a gathering storm. Prince Alexander stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on the edge as the parchment lay open before him. The king's ministers leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Lord Pembroke was there too, face calm, eyes glinting with satisfaction. "It appears, Your Highness," he said smoothly, "that Lord Whitmore was not merely unfortunate in business, as we once thought. This document suggests he corresponded with men who sought to undermine the crown. His name, his seal. There can be no mistake." Alexander read the page again. It was an old correspondence, a single sheet carrying accusations of sympathy with a movement that had long since been extinguished. It bore the faded crest of Whitmore Manor, and beneath the text, the unmistakable signature. "This is a serious charge," the prince said quietly. The king's advisor nodded. "Indeed, Your Highness, the family's loyalty will be questioned. If proven, the Whitmore name would be blackened, and those connected to them would do well to sever ties swiftly." A low wave of agreement spread across the table. Pembroke bowed slightly, his voice carrying a note of false regret. "I take no pleasure in this revelation, Your Highness. I merely thought it my duty to bring the truth to light, lest the court be embarrassed by unfortunate associations." Alexander's gaze sharpened. "Unfortunate associations," he repeated, his tone like ice. "You mean Miss Eleanor Whitmore?" Pembroke spread his hands in feigned humility. "I only wish to protect Your Highness's reputation. The people speak, and the crown must remain untarnished." The king, sitting silently until then, finally spoke. "Enough. We cannot act on rumor alone. But neither can we ignore it. Until this matter is resolved, Miss Whitmore must withdraw from court." Alexander's head turned sharply toward his father. "Father, she has done nothing. She bears the name of one who may have," the king interrupted, his voice firm. "And a prince cannot afford sentiment when duty demands distance. You will not see her until the truth is settled." There was finality in his tone. The meeting ended with murmured bows and rustling papers. Pembroke lingered near the door, catching Alexander's eye with a knowing look, before leaving. When the chamber emptied, Alexander remained where he was, staring at the fire. He could still hear Eleanor's voice from the night before, steady, honest, unpretending. The thought of her facing humiliation again filled him with quiet anger. He left the chamber abruptly. Eleanor had waited in her room all morning, unable to eat or rest. Every hour stretched longer than the last. When the knock finally came, it was not Alexander but a palace messenger who entered. "Miss Whitmore," the man said formally, "His Majesty requests that you prepare to depart at once. The carriage will be ready within the hour." She went still. "Depart?" "Until further notice," he said, avoiding her eyes. "The council has deemed it proper." Her breath came shallowly. "I see. Was there word from the prince?" "None that I am permitted to share, miss." He bowed and left. For a long moment she stood motionless. She wanted to rage, to demand an explanation. but there was no one left to hear her. At last she moved to her small writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. The words came slowly at first, then flowed as if pulled from her heart. "Your Highness, forgive my departure. I am told it is necessary, though my conscience is clear. You showed me kindness when the world did not, and that will remain my truest memory of London. I ask no defence, no pity, only that you remember I did not seek your favour, nor the place I held beside you. May God bless you in all things." She sealed the letter and left it on the desk, her name written simply across the front. When she stepped outside her chamber, the corridors seemed colder than before. Servants passed her silently, their eyes downcast. The great staircase stretched before her like a path of exile. Princess Charlotte appeared at the landing, breathless and pale. "Eleanor, tell me it isn't true." "I must go, Your Highness," Eleanor said gently. "My brother is furious," Charlotte whispered. "He fought them all, but father would not yield." "Please wait. Perhaps—" "There is no perhaps," Eleanor said softly. "It is better this way. I have brought him only trouble." Charlotte grasped her hand. "You brought him peace." For once, he smiled without reason. "Does that count for nothing?" Eleanor squeezed her fingers, managing a faint smile. "That is reason enough for me." They embraced briefly, and then Eleanor turned away before her resolve broke. The carriage waited in the courtyard, horses stamping in the cold air. A few guards stood nearby, indifferent but respectful. As she climbed inside, she glanced up once more at the palace windows. Somewhere beyond them, she imagined Alexander standing, watching. She whispered to the glass, "Be well, Your Highness." The driver cracked his reins. The carriage rolled forward. In truth, Alexander was watching. From the library window, he saw the carriage moving down the long avenue, its wheels cutting faint tracks in the frost. He felt the ache of helplessness, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who commanded nations with his signature. When the carriage vanished into the fog, he turned sharply. "Find Lord Pembroke," he ordered the attendant. "Now." Pembroke arrived an hour later, smug and unhurried. "Your Highness requested my presence?" Alexander's voice was calm, but the calmness was dangerous. "You have made grave accusations. You will present your evidence in full." "I already have," Pembroke replied smoothly. "The letter bears her father's hand. Surely that is enough." "Forged hands are common currency among liars," Alexander said coldly. "And you, my lord, are a practiced merchant." Pembroke's smile faltered. "You insult me, Your Highness." "I warn you," Alexander continued, "if I learn you have slandered her or her family for your own amusement, I will see your honor broken in every house that once welcomed you." Pembroke bowed stiffly. "Then I shall pray the truth favors me." When he left, Alexander called for his aide, Captain Grey. "Ride to Kent," he ordered, "to Whitmore Manor. Search the archives there, every ledger, every document. Bring me proof, one way or the other." "Yes, Your Highness," Grey said, bowing deeply before hurrying out. Left alone, Alexander sank into a chair, his mind restless. He had been raised to see the world in laws and duty, but tonight all he saw was her face when she said. It was not difficult to see the amusement in their eyes. He realized with a sudden clarity that he could not let her vanish into disgrace. Far from London, the carriage rolled through mist and rain. Eleanor sat quietly, her gloved hands folded in her lap. The city had already faded behind her, leaving only the sound of hooves and the soft murmur of the driver's voice to the horses. When they reached the countryside, she leaned out the window, drawing a breath of cold, clean air. She told herself she would not cry, but tears came anyway. Silent, quick, soon brushed away. By dusk, they reached a small inn where she was to rest for the night. The innkeeper's wife, a kind woman with gentle eyes, recognized her name but asked no questions. "You'll find the fire warm, miss," she said kindly, "and the road quieter in the morning." Eleanor thanked her, took her supper in silence, and went to her small room above the tavern. She could not sleep. Every sound from the street below seemed too loud, every gust of wind a whisper of the life she'd left behind. In the early hours she rose and opened her prayer book, the one Mrs. Holloway had given her. Between its pages, a slip of paper fell out. It was a simple verse written in the housekeeper's careful hand. "When the world mocks you, walk on. The jest will fade, but truth endures." She smiled faintly, tracing the words. "Then I will walk on," she murmured. At dawn, her carriage continued toward Kent. Whitmore Manor awaited, cold, empty, its gates half overgrown. When she entered, the servants looked at her with pity. Her mother barely greeted her, too concerned with what the neighbours might say. "You've brought shame on us," Lady Whitmore said quietly. "The papers in London whisper of your disgrace." "Do they whisper the truth?" Eleanor asked. Her mother turned away. "Truth matters less than appearance." Eleanor said nothing. She went to her old room beneath the eaves and looked out across the misty fields. Once this house had been her prison. Now it felt like a refuge, though only barely. That evening the local vicar called, offering polite condolences. He spoke of faith and patience, but his eyes carried curiosity. Everyone wanted to know the same thing, what had really happened between the prince and the ugly daughter from Kent. She answered little, only that she was home again and at peace. But deep down, she knew peace was far away. In London, Captain Grey returned 3 nights later, mud-stained and weary. He entered Alexander's study, saluted, and handed over a small bundle of papers. "These were hidden in the cellar archives at Whitmore Manor," he said. "Old correspondence. One bears the same seal as the accusation, but the writing differs. And this," he handed another sheet. "This is a note signed by Lord Pembroke's steward. It references the Whitmore matter and the need to deliver the letter swiftly. The date matches the forged document." Alexander's eyes darkened as he read. "So Pembroke forged it." "It appears so, Your Highness." Alexander stood, his decision immediate. "Then she will return and he will answer for this." Before Grey could respond, a royal messenger entered, breathless. "Your Highness," he said urgently, "His Majesty requests your presence in council. The matter of Miss Whitmore's father has become public." Alexander's hand tightened around the papers. "Public?" "Yes, Your Highness. The story is spreading through the city." The prince looked toward the window, where night was falling over London, its lights like distant embers. He felt the weight of the moment pressing upon him. He could not let the truth wait any longer. He would find her, clear her name, and confront the man who had made her a mockery to the world. But as he turned toward the door, another messenger appeared, holding a sealed letter. "For you, Your Highness," he said. "It arrived from Kent, bearing Miss Whitmore's hand." Alexander broke the seal and read the first line. His heart stilled. She was leaving Whitmore Manor. The letter's ink was barely dry. Alexander read it twice, his pulse quickening with each word. "Your Highness, do not seek me. I go where I can do no harm. I am content to be forgotten if it will bring peace to your name. Eleanor Whitmore." He folded the page carefully, though his hands trembled. Captain Grey waited nearby, reading his silence as a command. "Prepare a horse," Alexander said. "If she means to leave Kent, she will take the south road. I ride tonight." Grey hesitated. "Your Highness, the court—" "Let them talk," Alexander interrupted. "Let them say what they please. I will not have her vanish into exile because of a lie." Within an hour he was gone from London, the hooves of his horse echoing through the wet, empty streets. Eleanor had left Whitmore Manor before dawn. The house had grown even colder since her return, her mother's reproaches filling every corridor. She had no destination, only the need to leave behind the whispers and the shame. The road was lined with frost, and her small carriage creaked as it moved through the grey morning. She watched the bare trees pass like silent witnesses. Each mile felt lighter than the one before. At a crossroads near the river, she paused to rest. The coachman climbed down to check the horses, and she stepped out, stretching her stiff limbs. The water below was dark and slow. She looked out across it, whispering to no one. Perhaps this is what freedom feels like, empty but quiet. "Miss Whitmore?" a voice called from behind her. She turned. A rider was approaching at a gallop, his cloak snapping in the wind. Her breath caught when she recognized him. "Your Highness!" Alexander dismounted before she could speak again. "You should have told me," he said, his voice tight. "You should have waited." She looked at him in disbelief. "Waited? For more accusations? For more pity?" "For the truth," he said. "You were never meant to bear this alone." Eleanor shook her head. "The truth does not matter to them. Once the court decides what a woman is, no proof will change it." "Then I will change it," he said fiercely. "I will speak before the council myself." "And what then?" she asked quietly. "They will call you foolish. They will say the prince was bewitched by pity. I will not be the cause of your ruin. He stepped closer, his expression softening. "You think so little of my strength?" "I think much of your heart," she said. "That is why I must leave." They stood in silence, the wind pulling at their clothes, the river murmuring below. Finally he spoke again, his voice low. "If you must go, then take this." He reached into his coat and handed her a folded parchment. "It bears the proof that the accusation was forged. Pembroke's name is written there by his own steward. Keep it, should you ever need to defend yourself." She hesitated before taking it. "You risked much to find this." "I would risk more," he said, "but I cannot force you to return." Her eyes glistened. "Then let this be farewell, Your Highness. You have given me my name back. That is enough." He looked as if he might protest, but then his hand fell to his side. "If you will not return for the court," he said quietly, "then return when your heart tells you I have earned it." Eleanor's voice trembled. "I fear hearts are rarely consulted in such matters." She turned toward the carriage. "Farewell, my prince." He watched her climb inside, the door closing softly between them. When the wheels began to turn, he did not move. Only when the carriage disappeared down the foggy road did he whisper, "Farewell, my Eleanor." By the time Alexander returned to London, the storm had already broken. The rumor of Eleanor's supposed disgrace had spread through every parlor and drawing-room. The king summoned him at once. "I warned you," the king said sternly as Alexander entered the royal study. "The court is in uproar. You were seen riding out alone, again for her. This foolishness must end." "It will end," Alexander said, "when her name is cleared." The king's eyes hardened. "You have proof?" Alexander handed him the folded parchment. Pembroke's steward wrote this. The accusations were forged at his command. The Whitmores were innocent. The king read it, his brow furrowing. If this is true, Pembroke has committed treason of his own, treason against the honor of the crown. Alexander's voice was cold. "Then let him answer for it." The king looked at his son for a long moment. "You care for her?" Alexander did not deny it. "I do. And if I forbid you to see her again?" "Then you will have my loyalty," Alexander said, "but not my peace." The king sighed heavily. "Very well. We shall call Pembroke to account. But you will not speak of this woman publicly until her innocence is proclaimed by the council." Alexander bowed, but his heart was restless. He knew the council would protect its own, and Pembroke had many allies. Still, he would not let silence win. That evening, the council chamber was filled once more. Pembroke arrived confident and smiling, unaware of the trap waiting for him. Alexander stood at the center, the document in his hand. "My lords," he began, his voice steady but carrying through the hall, "you sit here as guardians of truth. It is your duty to expose deceit, even when it hides behind courtesy. Lord Pembroke, do you deny that this letter was written by your steward?" Pembroke's smile faded. "I deny nothing until I see what you accuse me of." Alexander handed him the parchment. As Pembroke read, the color drained from his face. "This is a forgery," he said quickly. "A fabrication." "Strange," Alexander replied, "that your own handwriting appears in the margin." The council members exchanged murmurs. The king's advisor leaned forward, frowning. "Is this true, Pembroke? Did you order the creation of a false document to disgrace an innocent family?" Pembroke stammered, but the evidence spoke louder than his protests. The steward, brought forth as witness, trembled under questioning and confessed that Pembroke had commanded him to create the false letter. The chamber erupted in noise. The king rose to his feet. "Lord Pembroke, your title and position are forfeit. You will withdraw from court and await further judgment." Pembroke tried to speak, but the guards were already at his side. As he was led away, his gaze met Alexander's. "You think this is finished?" he hissed. "You cannot erase the stain of scandal with truth alone. The whispers will remain." Alexander's expression did not change. "Then let the whispers meet their own echo." When the chamber emptied, Alexander stood alone before the fire. The proof was delivered, justice served, yet victory felt hollow. Eleanor was gone. The next morning, Princess Charlotte entered, her eyes bright with determination. "Brother," she said, "I will not sit idle while you look like a ghost. She must be told that her name is restored." He looked up at her, weary but grateful. "I wrote already. There has been no reply." "Then you are writing to the wrong place," Charlotte said. "She will not stay in Kent. I know her well enough to guess where she would go." "And where is that?" "Where no one knows her name," she said softly. "Perhaps the countryside near Dover, where the sea is quiet and the world forgets." He rose immediately. "Then that is where I shall find her." Charlotte smiled faintly. "Go, before father changes his mind." The road to Dover stretched long and bright beneath a pale winter sun. Alexander travelled alone, his cloak pulled tight against the wind. Villages passed in quick succession. Inns, cottages, quiet fields. Each face he asked brought him closer. At last, in a small village near the coast, he heard what he needed. A shopkeeper said, "There's a lady from Kent staying in the vicar's cottage. Teaches the children their letters, quiet as the dawn, kind too, wears grey." Alexander thanked him and rode on. The cottage came into view by late afternoon, a simple white house framed by hedges and the sound of the sea beyond. He dismounted, heart pounding. Through the window he saw her, Eleanor, seated at a table with two children, guiding their hands across the page. The sight of her calmness, her simple joy, pierced him more deeply than any accusation had. When the lesson ended and the children ran off laughing, he approached the door and knocked softly. She opened it, surprised, her eyes wide. "Your Highness, forgive me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I could not let you vanish again." Eleanor stepped back uncertainly, letting him in. "You should not be here." "I must be," he said. "Your name is cleared. Pembroke's deceit is exposed. The king himself has declared your family innocent." Her breath caught. "You truly mean it?" "I would not lie to you," he said. "I came to tell you myself." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Then justice has been done." "Yes," he said softly. "But not enough." She looked at him in confusion. "What more is there?" He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth has freed your name, Eleanor, but it has bound my heart." She drew back, trembling. "Do not say that. You have a duty, a crown." "And what is a crown without honor?" he asked. "What is honor without love?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The wind from the open door rustled the papers on the table between them. From outside came the sudden sound of hooves. A messenger dismounted and hurried to the door, bowing quickly. "Your Highness, urgent news from London. His Majesty demands your immediate return. The council debates your succession." Alexander turned sharply. "Succession?" "Yes, Your Highness," the man said breathlessly. "Your union with Miss Whitmore would threaten the alliance with the Northern Duchy. The king insists you choose at once, love or the crown." The words hung in the air like a blow. Alexander's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. "The council debates my succession because of her." The messenger shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Your Highness. The king fears the foreign alliance will falter if there is attachment." Eleanor stood motionless, her hands clasped before her. "Then you must go," she said softly, "at once." "I will not leave you to face the consequences of their lies," he said. "You must," she insisted. "If you stay, they will call you reckless. They will say I lured you from your duty." His voice rose, sharp with pain. "And must I forever live by what they say?" "Yes," she said quietly, "because you are their prince and I am their jest. Even cleared, I will never be one of them." The messenger shifted, embarrassed by their argument. "Your Highness," he murmured, "the king demands your presence tonight." Alexander nodded once. "Tell my father I will return." The man bowed and left, leading his horse away. When the sound of hooves faded, silence returned to the small room. The light from the sea flickered across Eleanor's face, and Alexander felt his heart twist. "Eleanor," he said softly, "do you regret that I came?" "I regret only that you must suffer for it," she replied. "The world will forgive me easily. It always forgives women it finds insignificant. But it will not forgive a prince who dares to think with his heart." He stepped closer. "Do you wish me gone?" Her eyes met his, steady and sad. "Yes," she whispered, "because if you stay, I will not have the strength to tell you again." He reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Then let me see you once more before duty claims me again. Not as a prince, but as a man who remembers what honesty feels like." She trembled but did not pull away. "You make it hard to forget." "Good," he said. "Then I have done something right." The sound of the sea filled the silence between them. When he finally turned to go, she did not call him back. She stood by the doorway until his horse disappeared beyond the hill, the sky burning with the first light of sunset. That night, London glimmered with restless tension. When Alexander entered the great hall, the king and his ministers were already assembled. "You defied my command," the king said before anyone could speak. "You rode to her when the matter was already settled." "The matter was not settled," Alexander answered. "A woman's name was destroyed, her life broken, and no one lifted a hand to stop it until I did." The king's gaze was stern. "A ruler must know which battles are worth fighting. You forget that the realm depends upon alliances. The Northern Duchy has made it clear. They will withdraw their treaty if you persist in this attachment." "Then let them," Alexander said coldly. "I will not barter affection for politics." The chamber erupted in murmurs. The king rose, anger breaking through his composure. "Enough! You will not throw away a century of peace for a woman who cannot stand beside you without scandal." Alexander's voice lowered, but the force within it was unmistakable. "If scandal is the measure of worth, then this kingdom is full of unworthy men." The silence that followed was dangerous. The king studied him, seeing not the obedient son, but the man he had become. "You forget yourself," he said at last. "I will give you time to reconsider. 1 week. At the end of it, you will accept the alliance or renounce your claim to the throne." Alexander bowed slightly. "Then you will have my answer in 7 days." When he left the hall, the courtiers' whispers followed him like shadows. Eleanor returned to the quiet rhythm of village life. Each morning she taught the children their lessons. Each evening she walked by the sea, her thoughts adrift like the tide. The letter Alexander had given her, the proof of her family's innocence, lay hidden in her prayer book. She never looked at it without hearing his voice. One afternoon she heard footsteps behind her on the path. She turned expecting a villager, but it was Captain Grey. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing slightly. "I come by order of His Highness." Her heart leapt, but she masked it quickly. "He should not have sent you." "He insists you know what passes in London," Grey said. "The king has given him an ultimatum. In 1 week, he must choose between the alliance or his right to the throne." Eleanor went pale. "Because of me, because of love," Grey said quietly. "He will not let them dictate his heart." She shook her head. "He must not sacrifice the crown. Tell him so." "I think you underestimate his resolve," Grey said, "and his sorrow." "Then tell him this," she said firmly. "I will not be the reason a kingdom falters. If he chooses me, he loses his people. If he chooses them, he keeps his honor. That is no choice at all." Grey hesitated. "He will not see it that way." "Then he must learn," she whispered. He bowed again, pity in his eyes. "As you wish, Miss Whitmore." After he left, she sat on the rocks near the water, her hands trembling. She could not bear the thought of Alexander's ruin. There was only one way to stop it. That night, she began to write. "Your Highness, forgive me. You must not fight for what cannot be won. I will leave England. Do not seek me. Forget that I ever stood before you, and remember only that I wished you peace." She sealed the letter and sent it before dawn. Days passed. Alexander read the letter in his chamber, his face pale with disbelief. The edges of the page trembled in his grasp. "She means to leave England," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. "She thinks this is mercy." Captain Grey stood nearby. "She left the village at sunrise, bound for the port. She means to sail for France." Alexander stared out the window, his decision already forming. "Then the council will have to wait." Grey hesitated. The king will hear my answer when I return," Alexander said, striding toward the door. He rode through the night, the wind tearing at his cloak, the cold biting through his gloves. By dawn, he reached the coastal road. The air smelled of salt and departure. At the harbor, he saw the small ship readying to sail, its sails pale against the grey horizon. And there, on the dock, stood Eleanor, her simple cloak drawn tight, her trunk at her side. He dismounted and called out, "Eleanor?" She turned, shock flashing across her face. "Your Highness, no, you must not be here." "I told you once I would come when the world was wrong," he said, striding toward her. "You think I would let you vanish now?" Tears filled her eyes. "You will lose everything." "Then let me lose it for something worth keeping," he said. She stepped back, shaking her head. "You cannot mean that. Your father, your duty." "My duty is to truth," he said. "And the truth is that I cannot stand before a crown that demands I betray my heart." The ship's bell rang, calling passengers to board. The sailors shouted orders, the air full of motion and noise. Eleanor's voice trembled. "If you love me, do not do this." "If I love you," he repeated, "it is because I do that I must." He took her hands, holding them tightly. "You have been the only honest thing in a world built on appearances. You ask me to rule such a world without you? I cannot." She tried to pull away, but his grip was gentle and sure. "Alexander, please, your father will never forgive this." "Then let him forgive himself," he said. "I will answer for my own soul." The sailors called again, and the gangway began to rise. Eleanor looked from the ship to him, torn between fear and longing. "You would forsake a throne?" she whispered. "For a woman who taught me that worth is not born of titles," he said. "Yes." She looked at him a long moment, the wind catching her hair. "Then what becomes of us?" He smiled faintly. "That depends on how brave you are." Before she could answer, shouts rose from the far end of the pier. 2 royal guards appeared on horseback, waving a sealed decree. "By order of His Majesty," one cried, "the prince is commanded to return to the palace at once. He is to answer for his defiance before the crown." The crowd turned, whispers swelling like a tide. The guards dismounted and advanced, the parchment held out. Eleanor's face went white. "You must go," she whispered urgently. "If they see you with me, it will only worsen your fate." He did not move. "My fate is already sealed." "Please," she begged, "if you love me, ride back now, face them, and prove them wrong. Do not throw away all that could still be mended." He looked at her, the struggle plain in his eyes. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then he stepped back slowly, his voice hoarse. "If I leave now, it is not because they command it, but because you do." Her lips parted, trembling. "Go before it's too late." He mounted his horse, his gaze never leaving her. "I will return for you," he said. "No decree, no king will stop me." She swallowed hard. "And if they bar the gates? Then I will tear them down," he said simply. The guards turned their horses, leading the way back to London. Alexander followed without looking back, though the sound of the sea and her quiet sobs trailed after him like a shadow. When the last echo of hooves faded from the pier, Eleanor sank to her knees, her hands pressed to her chest. The ship's captain called her name, but she could not answer. Above the water, the horizon brightened with morning light, just as a dark cloud of riders appeared in the distance, galloping toward the harbor with banners bearing the royal crest. The riders approached swiftly, their horses kicking up waves of mist along the pier. Eleanor rose, shielding her eyes from the glare. For one heartbeat, she thought the king had sent more guards for Alexander. But as the banners came closer, she recognized Captain Grey at their head. He dismounted before the ship's crew could react. "Miss Whitmore," he said breathlessly, "you must come with us. His Highness sent word from London. He needs you." Eleanor shook her head. "I cannot. He has enough to face without me adding to his burden." "This is no whim," Grey said. "The truth must be proven before the council again. Pembroke's steward has vanished, and without your testimony the prince's word will not stand." She stared at him in disbelief. "You mean they still doubt?" "Doubt is a habit among men who live by politics," Grey said grimly. "If you do not speak, they will twist the story until even his honor bends beneath it." Eleanor's voice trembled. "If I return, I condemn him. The king will see it as defiance." "And if you do not," he replied, "you condemn him all the same." The ship's captain shouted from the gangway, urging passengers aboard. Eleanor looked from the vessel to the waiting horses. Her heart raced. "If I go," she whispered, "there will be no forgiveness from the crown." Grey met her gaze. "Perhaps not. But there will be truth. And truth, Miss Whitmore, is what His Highness fights for." She hesitated for only a moment more, then lifted her chin. "Very well, I will go." The sailors called her name again, but she turned away, gathering her cloak. As Grey helped her into the saddle, the sea wind caught her hair, sending it streaming behind her. The ship's bell rang once, final, hollow, and then they were gone, the horses galloping toward the road that led to London. In the capital, the palace was alive with rumor. The council had gathered once more to decide Alexander's fate. Behind the closed doors of the great hall, noblemen argued, their voices clashing like swords. The king sat silent on his throne, his expression unreadable. "Where is my son?" he asked at last. "He prepares his defense, Your Majesty," said the chancellor. though many among us believe there can be no defense for such rebellion." "He has not rebelled," said the princess suddenly from the gallery. "He has only chosen honesty over convenience." "Your Highness," the Chancellor said, bowing slightly, "the prince's choices threaten our alliances. His heart may be pure, but his actions are reckless." Charlotte's eyes flashed. "Reckless is the man who destroys truth for power." The king raised a hand. "Enough, the prince will speak for himself." At that moment the doors opened. Alexander entered, his cloak still bearing the dust of the road. He bowed to his father, his face calm, though his eyes showed fatigue. "You were summoned," the king said, "and you return without explanation." "I have no excuse," Alexander said quietly. "Only a reason." The Chancellor stepped forward, unrolling a parchment. "Your Highness, this council accuses you of endangering the stability of the crown by refusing a sanctioned union and by pursuing a woman whose past was tainted by scandal." Alexander met his gaze steadily. "Her past was tainted by your lies." The room stirred. "You accuse the council?" "I accuse deceit, wherever it hides," he said. "And I will prove it." The king leaned forward. "You claim proof. Then where is it?" Alexander glanced toward the door. "On her way here." The journey was relentless. The sky grew darker with each mile, clouds pressing low. Eleanor's horse stumbled on the rough road, but she urged it forward, determined. Grey rode beside her, silent but watchful. "You will need courage, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "They will not greet you kindly." "I have lived too long with ridicule to fear it now," she answered. As they neared the city, the rain began, thin at first, then heavy and cold. By the time they reached the palace gates, their cloaks were soaked through. The guards recognized Grey and stepped aside, though their eyes lingered on Eleanor with curiosity. He led her through the back corridors, away from prying eyes. The echo of raised voices grew louder as they neared the council chamber. When they reached the grand doors, Grey paused. "This is the moment, Miss Whitmore. Whatever happens inside, remember who you are." She nodded once. "I remember." He pushed the doors open. The hall fell silent as Eleanor entered, rain glistening in her hair. The courtiers stared, some with open disdain, others with surprise. Alexander rose immediately. "Eleanor," he said softly, relief flooding his voice. The king's eyes widened. "You dare bring her here?" "Not I," Alexander said, turning toward Grey. "Truth brought her," the Chancellor sneered. "A convenient truth. Let us see if it withstands the light." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear though her hands trembled. "Your Majesty, I come not to defend myself but to speak what is right." The king studied her. "You have courage, Miss Whitmore. I will grant you that. But courage does not erase the stain of your family's history." "Then perhaps evidence will," she said, drawing from her cloak the sealed parchment Alexander had given her, the one bearing the steward's confession. "This was written by Lord Pembroke's own servant. He admits the forgery that condemned my father's name. Read it, Your Majesty, and judge fairly." The Chancellor moved to intercept, but Alexander took the document and handed it to the king himself. Silence fell as the old man read. Line by line, his expression changed, from skepticism to surprise, then to quiet shame. When he looked up, the room was utterly still. "The accusation was false," he said. "Lord Pembroke deceived us all." Eleanor bowed her head. "My father may rest in peace now." But the Chancellor was not finished. "Even if her name is cleared, Your Majesty, she remains unsuited to royal company. The people will not accept a woman of no fortune or title." Alexander turned sharply. "Then the people will learn to value what their lords have forgotten." The king rose slowly, the weight of years in his posture. "You mean to defy me still?" "I mean to be honest," Alexander said. "I will not bind myself to a loveless alliance. Nor will I abandon the one person in this court who has never lied to me." The king's eyes softened for a brief moment, then hardened again. "You would risk the throne?" "For truth, yes," Alexander said. "For love, yes." The murmurs swelled again. Some ministers looked appalled, others merely curious, but none spoke louder than the quiet certainty in his voice. Eleanor stood still, her heart pounding. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "if my presence brings discord, I will go. He should not lose his crown for my sake." "Do not speak of leaving," Alexander said quickly. Not again. The king turned to her. Would you truly walk away from him to preserve his name? She met his gaze steadily. Yes. Something flickered in the king's eyes, perhaps understanding, perhaps regret. He turned back to his son. Then you see, Alexander. She loves you more wisely than you love yourself. Alexander's voice broke. Father, but the king raised a hand. No more. The council will adjourn until morning. You will both remain in the palace tonight. He left the chamber without another word. The night was long and sleepless. Rain struck the windows as if echoing their unrest. Eleanor sat in a small guest chamber near the gallery, her thoughts tumbling between fear and hope. A knock came softly at the door. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, shadows beneath his eyes. You should rest, she said gently. I cannot, he replied. They will decide tomorrow whether I am fit to rule. And if they say no, then I will be free. She shook her head. Freedom born of loss is not peace. He smiled faintly. You always speak as though wisdom were easy. It is not, she said, but it keeps the heart from breaking entirely. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Tell me honestly, if I lose everything, would you still have me? She looked up at him, her answer trembling on her lips. Yes, she whispered, but it would destroy me to see you fall. Then perhaps, he murmured, we will both fall and rise together. Before she could speak, the door burst open. Captain Grey entered, pale and breathless. Your Highness, he said, the council meets already. They mean to vote before dawn. Alexander straightened. Without me? Yes, Grey said grimly. They seek to force your abdication before your father wakes. Eleanor's heart seized. Then go now. Alexander turned to her, taking her hands. Promise me one thing. No matter what they decide, you will not leave this place until I return. I promise, she whispered. He held her gaze for one long moment, then strode from the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Eleanor pressed her palms together, listening until the sound was gone. The rain outside had stopped, but thunder still rolled in the distance. Then from somewhere deep within the palace, a sudden roar of voices broke through the silence. Shouts, hurried footsteps, the crash of a door flung open, and her heart froze as she heard her name shouted among them. Eleanor ran to the door, her heart hammering. The shouts came closer, heavy boots striking the marble, voices rising and falling. She opened the door just as Captain Grey appeared, his face pale with urgency. Miss Whitmore, you must come quickly, he said. They've turned against the prince. Her breath caught. What do you mean, turned? The council has declared him unfit, Grey said. They claim his judgment is compromised by affection. They've sent for the king to ratify the vote before dawn. She gripped the doorframe for support. But the king saw the proof. He knows the truth. Truth bends easily in council chambers, he said bitterly. Pembroke's allies still hold power, even in disgrace. They whisper that the prince's actions threaten the realm. Eleanor's voice trembled. Then he will lose everything. Unless something changes their minds, Grey said, and quickly. She looked toward the grand staircase. Where is he? In the council hall, demanding they wait for the king, but they will not. Take me there, she said suddenly. Grey hesitated. It will not be safe. They already blame you for this. Then let them see me, she said, her voice firm. If they think I ruined him, let them look me in the eyes when they say it. He saw the determination in her face and gave a short nod. Stay behind me. They moved through the dim corridors, past guards who whispered but did not intervene. The great double doors of the council chamber stood open. Inside, nobles filled the long room, their voices a storm of argument and accusation. At the head of the table stood Alexander, surrounded by men twice his age, his expression calm but defiant. His hands rested on the table's edge as though to steady the very ground beneath him. I will not resign my claim, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. You can strip me of the throne, but not of my conscience. The Chancellor sneered. Your conscience, Your Highness, has already led you astray. The crown demands sacrifice, not sentiment. Alexander met his gaze. You speak of sacrifice as though it were a coin you spend in others' blood. I know its price, and I would pay it willingly, except that you demand I pay it with love. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Then a voice rose from the back, sharp and accusing. And there she is, the cause of it all. Heads turned. Eleanor stood at the threshold, pale but composed. Alexander's eyes widened. "Eleanor, I told you to stay." "I will not hide while they condemn you," she said, stepping forward. The Chancellor's lip curled. "You come to watch the fall you caused?" She met his scorn with quiet resolve. "I come to prevent it." "You presume much, Miss Whitmore," said another lord. "This council governs the future of the crown. You have no place here." "Perhaps not," she said, "but I have a voice, and truth does not need permission to speak." Alexander's hand clenched at his side, torn between pride and fear for her. "Eleanor, please." But she was already speaking, her voice clear and strong. "You call me the reason for his downfall. Yet it was not I who deceived this court with forged letters and lies. It was men among you, men who feared honesty because it made their deceit visible. You punished me not for treason, but for being plain, for not shining like the women you preferred to adorn your halls. And now you punish him because he saw beyond that illusion." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Chancellor rose to silence it, but she continued, her words quick and fearless. "You fear what his love means. It means that your wealth and titles are not the measure of worth. It means that a crown can rest on a man who listens to his heart instead of your counsel. That is why you wish to silence him, not for the good of England, but for the comfort of your vanity." The oldest member of the council, Lord Ashbourne, shifted uneasily. "Careful, child. You speak boldly before those who decide the fate of kings." "Then may they decide it honestly," she said. "If he must fall, let him fall for truth, not for lies whispered by cowards." Alexander stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Enough. You have said more than I ever could." But the chamber had changed. The lords who had been so loud a moment ago now murmured uncertainly, their confidence shaken. Lord Ashbourne rose again, his tone softer. "The lady speaks with conviction. Perhaps we have judged too quickly." The Chancellor scoffed. "Words of sentiment. They prove nothing." "Nor does your fear of them," Ashbourne replied. "Perhaps it is not the prince who is unfit to lead, but those too proud to be led." The doors burst open once more, and the king entered, flanked by guards. His face was grave. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the head of the table. "I was told there is division among my council," he said. "Explain." The Chancellor bowed stiffly. "Your Majesty, the council has found the prince's attachment improper and his conduct unbecoming of the heir." The king's gaze moved to Alexander, then to Eleanor. "And you, Miss Whitmore. You stand here again, though you were sent away." "Why?" "Because I could not let him fight alone," she said softly. The king regarded her a long moment, then turned to his son. "You know what is at stake. Speak now, before I decide." Alexander took a slow breath. "You taught me, father, that a crown's weight is measured by the integrity of the man who wears it. If that is true, then I cannot sit on a throne that demands I lie about my heart." The king's eyes narrowed. "So you would renounce it for her?" "I would renounce it for truth," he said simply. The silence that followed was heavy enough to stop breath. The king rose slowly. "Then you would have me cast aside alliances, anger half the realm, and risk war, all for a love that began as a jest." Eleanor bowed her head. "Then let the jest end here, Your Majesty." "What did you say?" "End it," she said, lifting her gaze to meet his. "They mocked me because I was not what they wanted. Let them mock again, but let it end with me. Blame me, exile me, do whatever restores your peace, but do not punish your son for loving decently in a world that has forgotten how." Her voice broke at the last word, but she held her ground. The king's hand trembled slightly on the table. "You would take the blame?" "Yes," she whispered, "if it will save him." Alexander moved toward her, his voice raw. "No, I will not let you be sacrificed for me." She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "You cannot stop me from choosing as you chose." The king watched them both, his face unreadable. At last he spoke. "Leave us." The councilmen filed out slowly, uncertain, glancing back as they went. When the door closed, only the king, Alexander, and Eleanor remained. The old man looked between them, and something in his expression softened. "You remind me," he said quietly, "of what it cost me to wear this crown. I once loved a woman my father forbade. I buried that love in obedience and called it duty. You would have me believe there is another way." "There is," Alexander said, "but it cannot exist without your blessing." The king sighed. The world will not welcome it. They will call it folly. Then let them, Alexander said. History will call it courage. The king's eyes closed for a moment, as though the years weighed heavier than before. Then he nodded slowly. If I grant this, you must know the price. The alliance will fall. The throne may be contested. Are you prepared to lose all for this woman? Alexander took Eleanor's hand. I already have, and still I stand. The king turned to her. And you, Miss Whitmore, if I grant his wish, will you bear what follows? The ridicule, the burden, the endless eyes upon you. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Yes, your majesty. For him, I will bear anything. The king's shoulders lowered in resignation. Then perhaps my reign will end with a lesson I had forgotten. He looked toward the door. Summon the council again at dawn. I will speak before them. Alexander's breath caught. You mean? The king raised a hand. Do not thank me yet. The decision is not yours alone to bear. He turned to leave, his footsteps slow but resolute. When the door closed behind him, the chamber seemed suddenly vast and quiet. Eleanor looked at Alexander, her voice trembling. What will he say? I do not know, he said. But for the first time I think he sees us. She let out a breath that was half laughter, half sob. Then whatever comes, I am ready. Alexander drew her close, their foreheads almost touching. If dawn brings freedom, I will marry you before the sun sets. She smiled through her tears. And if it brings exile, then I will follow you into exile. The corridor outside stirred with motion. Footsteps. The king's guards preparing for the morning assembly. Eleanor turned toward the window, watching the faint light creep across the sky. It will be dawn soon. Yes, Alexander said quietly. And with it, our judgment. The bells began to toll across the city, summoning the council back to the palace, and in their echo came the sound of horses, many of them, arriving at the gates. The bells echoed through the cold morning air as the council gathered once again. The courtiers filed into the great hall, whispering nervously. The heavy doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. Eleanor stood beside Princess Charlotte at the edge of the room. Alexander was already there, his face calm but pale. At the far end of the chamber the king entered, every step deliberate. His crown caught the dim light, though his expression was weary. No one spoke as he took his seat. Only the faint creak of wood and the murmur of breath filled the silence. The matter before us, the king began, concerns the future of the crown, the peace of the realm, and the integrity of a prince's heart. The chancellor bowed stiffly. Your Majesty, we have weighed the matter with care. The council believes His Highness's judgment has been clouded by affection. The alliance with the Northern Duchy must be sealed through marriage or risk collapse. The king's gaze moved to his son. And what say you, Alexander? Alexander bowed his head slightly. That peace built on falsehood is no peace at all. If our allies require the sacrifice of truth, then they are not allies worth keeping. Murmurs swept through the hall. The chancellor's face reddened. Your Majesty, this is folly. Without the alliance, trade will suffer. Borders will weaken. The king silenced him with a look. Enough, I have heard enough of borders and trade. Let us speak instead of honor. The hall fell still again. The king's voice was low but carried to every corner. When I was a younger man, I too was faced with such a choice. I chose the crown and buried my heart. It made me a ruler, but it cost me something greater. My son would choose differently. Perhaps he is wiser than his father. A stunned silence followed. The chancellor's mouth opened, then closed again. Lord Ashbourne bowed his head slowly, as if in acknowledgement of a truth long overdue. Alexander took a step forward. Father, the king raised his hand. Do not speak yet. I have more to say. He looked toward Eleanor, who stood motionless beside Charlotte. Miss Whitmore, the world has wronged you. My court mocked you, and my judgment condemned you without cause. For that I ask forgiveness, not as a king, but as a man who should have known better. Eleanor lowered her head, tears stinging her eyes. Your Majesty, forgiveness is easily given when it is so humbly asked. The king's expression softened. You have shown courage and grace, qualities rare among those born to privilege. I see now why my son holds you dear. The chancellor rose again, desperate. Your Majesty, if the prince insists upon this path, the duchy will withdraw their pledge. We risk open conflict. The king's voice turned sharp. Then we will find peace without their promises. I will not trade my son's honor for their convenience." Alexander's chest tightened, the weight of years lifting in that single moment. "Father, you mean—" "I mean," said the king, "that the throne will not stand between you and the woman you love." A collective gasp moved through the room. Charlotte clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a cheer, while several lords exchanged shocked glances. The Chancellor sputtered, "Your Majesty, the Council cannot condone—" "The Council," the king interrupted, his tone like thunder, "will obey." No one dared speak again. Alexander moved toward his father, bowing deeply. "You honor me beyond words." The king studied him a long moment, his sternness returning. "Do not thank me yet. What I give you now, you must protect with more than pride. Love is not a crown to be worn lightly." "I understand," Alexander said, "and I will guard it all my days." The king nodded once, then turned to the assembly. "Let it be known that my son will not marry for treaty or title, but for the one thing too many rulers forget, virtue. The council is dismissed." The chamber erupted with noise, some in protest, others in awe. As the lords departed in murmuring clusters, Alexander crossed to Eleanor. She could not speak. Her eyes shimmered with disbelief. "Did that truly happen?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "It seems even kings remember their hearts at last." Charlotte ran to them, laughing through tears. "You both look as if the world just ended." "In some ways it did," Alexander said softly. "The world as we knew it." That evening the palace was quieter than it had been in years. The storm of debate had passed, leaving behind a strange calm. But in the shadows of that calm, a new kind of tension lingered. Eleanor sat in the small drawing room overlooking the gardens. The windows were open, letting in the scent of rain and earth. She had been given temporary chambers, though she felt unsteady within them. When the door opened, she rose quickly. It was the king. "Your Majesty," she said, startled. "Forgive me, I did not expect—" He raised a hand gently. "No formalities, child. I came not as a ruler, but as a father." She hesitated. "Then I am honored." He studied her quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You remind me of the woman I once loved. She too spoke truth when others dared not. I failed her. I do not wish my son to make the same mistake." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Your kindness humbles me." "Kindness?" the king said. "No. Gratitude. You have given my son back to himself. That is no small gift." She could not answer. He took a slow breath, as though the next words cost him effort. "Still, the road ahead will not be gentle. There will be whispers, slander, envy. Many will not forgive you for what you represent." "I do not seek their forgiveness," she said quietly. "Only his love." The king smiled faintly. "Then you already possess what most queens never find." He turned toward the door. "The ceremony will be arranged swiftly. The world must see that the crown honors what it once mocked." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Ceremony." He glanced back at her. "Did my son not tell you? I have granted my blessing. There will be a marriage. Yours." She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "So soon?" "Delay will only feed doubt," the king said, "and I am too old for half measures. Tomorrow the court shall gather, and the prince shall declare before all that his choice is final." He paused. "Rest well, Miss Whitmore, the morning will belong to you." When he left, Eleanor sat down heavily, her hands shaking. Tomorrow. It hardly seemed real. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, Alexander stood with Captain Grey, the faint glow of the fire casting long shadows across the walls. "Tomorrow," Grey said softly. "Do you believe they will accept it?" "They will have to," Alexander replied. "My father's word is law." Grey nodded slowly. "Still, the nobility will not forget this slight. Pembroke's allies may yet stir trouble." "Let them," Alexander said. "They have built their power on deceit. Let them choke on truth for once." Grey smiled faintly. "You speak like a king." Alexander looked toward the window. "Perhaps, but tomorrow I will speak only as a man in love." He dismissed Grey for the night and remained alone. His thoughts turned to Eleanor, to her courage, her humility, the way she stood before the council without trembling. He could still hear her words echoing in his mind. "Blame me, exile me, but do not punish your son for loving decently." He smiled at the memory, though it filled him with ache. "You saved me," he whispered to the empty room. "Now let me save you." The morning came with a hush of anticipation. The palace courtyard was draped in white banners, the symbol of renewal. Servants hurried through the corridors, carrying garlands and silver candlesticks. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her chamber, her gown simple but elegant, a pale cream with lace at the sleeves. Charlotte helped fasten the clasp at her neck. "You look like a story," the princess said softly. "I feel like a mistake," Eleanor admitted. Charlotte laughed. "Then it is a beautiful one." They embraced quickly before a servant entered to summon her. "The court is gathered," he said. Eleanor followed him through the corridors, her heart pounding with every step. In the grand hall, nobles filled the balconies, whispering behind their fans. At the far end, the king sat in state, Alexander standing beside him. When she entered, the murmurs grew louder. Alexander turned. Their eyes met, and the noise faded into nothing. He extended his hand as she approached. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Yes," she whispered. "So am I," he said, smiling. The king rose. "Let it be known that today, before heaven and court alike, my son chooses not the daughter of a duke, nor the cousin of a count, but a woman of courage, honor, and humility, Miss Eleanor Whitmore." A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall, but the king continued, unshaken. "And I, his father, give my blessing." Alexander turned to Eleanor, his voice quiet but firm. "Eleanor, when I first saw you, I saw only what others mocked. But in time, I learned that they mocked what they envied, the strength to be honest in a world built on pretense. Will you stand beside me, not as a subject, but as my equal?" Her lips trembled. "Yes," she said. A cheer broke from the balcony, though some faces remained cold. The sound of applause grew, until even the doubters joined reluctantly. Alexander lifted her hand and kissed it, the gesture simple, but full of reverence. The king smiled faintly. "Then let it be done." But before the words of blessing could be spoken, a sudden commotion erupted at the far doors. The guard stepped aside as a breathless messenger ran into the hall, mud spattered on his uniform. He fell to one knee before the throne. "Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern border. The duchy's envoy rides this way. They demand audience at once, or the alliance is broken." A wave of uneasy murmurs swept through the hall. The joy that had filled the air moments before turned sharp, like a draught of cold wind. The king's face hardened, though he kept his composure. "An envoy?" he repeated. "So soon?" The messenger, still kneeling, nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. They bring formal protest. The Northern Duchy claims this marriage dishonors the alliance pledged in good faith." Alexander's jaw tightened. "They would call honor dishonor simply because it serves them." The king gestured sharply. "Summon the envoy to the council chamber. We will hear their grievance before the court disperses." The nobles exchanged glances. Some whispered that the celebration had ended before it began. Others looked at Eleanor with something close to pity. Alexander turned to her. "Do not fear. Their outrage is nothing but noise." She managed a small smile. "Even noise can drown out truth when shouted by many voices." He squeezed her hand. "Then we will speak louder." Within the hour, the council chamber was once again filled. The northern envoy entered in a sweep of crimson and silver, his bearing proud, his expression severe. He bowed only slightly to the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his accent crisp, "I come on behalf of His Grace the Duke of Merrow. The proposed union between your son and the Lady Clarisse of Merrow was not merely personal. It was the cornerstone of peace between our realms. If your son now weds another, our treaty is void." The king regarded him steadily. "Peace built on compulsion is no peace at all." The envoy's mouth curved slightly. "Then perhaps war will be more honest." A ripple of unease passed through the lords gathered behind the king. Alexander stepped forward, voice firm. "You speak of war as though it were a game. If your duke seeks to break peace because his pride is wounded, then let him bear the weight of it before God and history alike." The envoy turned to him, his tone cold. "Your Highness, a prince's word is his bond. You gave yours to our house." "I gave it under counsel," Alexander replied, "not of my own heart." "Then you betray your throne and your father's crown." The king rose, his tone suddenly sharp. Enough. This court will not be threatened within its own walls. You will return to your master with my answer. England keeps her peace, but not at the cost of her son's integrity. The envoy bowed stiffly. Then may integrity comfort you when trade ceases and allies turn away. He turned to leave, his cloak sweeping the marble floor. The doors closed behind him with a sound that seemed to echo forever. When the chamber finally fell silent, the king sank slowly back into his chair. "So it begins," he murmured. Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder. "Father, if I have brought trouble?" The king raised a hand. "No, you have brought truth, and truth, though costly, is the only coin worth spending." He looked toward Eleanor, his expression softening. "Do not let this shadow your joy, my dear. The court may grumble, but the people will see what their betters cannot. They will see love where others see only scandal." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "You are kinder than I deserve, your majesty." The king smiled faintly. "No one who teaches a kingdom to feel again deserves too little." That evening, the palace seemed to breathe differently. The courtiers had retreated to their chambers, whispering of trade, politics, and pride. In the quiet of the corridor, Alexander found Eleanor standing by the window, watching the first snow of the season fall across the gardens. "Do you think it will last?" she asked without turning. "The snow?" "The peace." He moved beside her. "I cannot say, but if it doesn't, then we will endure the storm together." She smiled faintly, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "You speak as though you were born for battle. I was born for burden," he said softly. "But you have turned it into purpose." She looked at him then, her voice trembling. "You make it sound as though I have given you strength. In truth, I have done nothing but bring trouble." He shook his head. "You have done what no minister, no soldier, no crown ever could. You reminded me why I wanted to rule at all." Her eyes filled, but she laughed quietly through the tears. "And what if they never forgive you for choosing me? Then let them spend their lives chasing forgiveness," he said. "We shall live ours in peace." Outside, the bells from the chapel tower rang softly, echoing through the cold air. The next morning, the king summoned his council once more. The atmosphere was different now, less defiant, more solemn. "I have made my choice," he said simply. "England will stand independent of foreign pledges. We will bear the cost with dignity. Let the world learn that peace born of manipulation is no peace at all." The chancellor, for once subdued, bowed his head. "Your Majesty, the court will obey, but the treasury will feel the loss." "Then we shall work harder," the king replied. "Perhaps a little humility will do our nobles good." He rose and looked toward his son. "You will begin preparations for the wedding. The people must see stability, not division." Alexander bowed. "Yes, father." Eleanor, seated quietly beside Princess Charlotte, felt tears sting her eyes again, not of sorrow, but of relief. For the first time she believed peace might truly hold. The king smiled faintly at her. "Miss Whitmore, I once thought I ruled my people by power alone. You have shown me that a ruler must first be ruled by conscience. You and my son have done what politics could not. You have made me a better man." She lowered her gaze, humbled beyond words. As winter deepened, the palace began to change. The halls, once filled with gossip, grew quieter. Courtiers who had once mocked now bowed politely, unsure of their place in this new order. The wedding preparations moved swiftly. Invitations were sent not only to nobles, but also to the townsfolk of nearby villages, a gesture unheard of at the king's suggestion. "Let the people see that their future queen once shared their silence," he said. "It will do them good to remember that worth is not born of lineage." Eleanor spent her days helping the servants prepare the chapel, her humility disarming those who had once scorned her. Even the maids whispered that she was not like other ladies, that she worked as though she did not yet believe the crown was truly hers. One evening, as she arranged flowers near the altar, Charlotte came to her side. "You should rest," the princess said. "You'll have no strength left for your own wedding." Eleanor smiled. "It feels less like mine and more like England's." "Perhaps that's how it should be." Charlotte looked at her, eyes soft. "You know, when this began, I feared for my brother. Now I pity anyone who ever doubted him." Eleanor's hands stilled on the bouquet. "He is stronger than he knows." "So are you," Charlotte said. "He's just the first to see it." They embraced briefly before the sound of footsteps approached. Alexander entered quietly, his gaze finding Eleanor immediately. "I wondered where you'd gone," he said gently. "The entire palace seems to search for you when you vanish." "I was only helping," she said. He smiled. "You never stop giving. I have so much to repay," she replied softly. He shook his head. "There is nothing to repay. Only to live." The candles flickered between them, and for a moment the noise of the palace faded away. That night a letter arrived from the north. It bore the seal of the Duke of Merrow, but the tone was unexpectedly measured. "To His Majesty, the King of England, we will not war against those who follow their hearts, though our treaty is ended. May your son's union bring peace to your house, even as ours withdraws. Pride may divide kingdoms, but love has sometimes healed them." The king read it aloud in the council, then smiled. "So even pride can learn humility." Alexander looked at Eleanor. "Perhaps the world is not so cruel after all." She laughed softly. "Not when you defy it so stubbornly." The following days passed like a dream. The palace bustled with quiet joy. For once no one mocked, no one whispered. Even the courtiers seemed gentler. The king, though older and frailer than before, walked daily through the halls with a lighter step. He spoke of a future he could finally trust. "After tomorrow," he told Alexander, "my heart will rest. You have made right what my generation broke." Alexander clasped his father's hand. "You have given me more than I deserved." The old king smiled. "No, my son. You earned it by being better than I ever was." That evening the palace bells rang again, announcing the dawn of celebration. The chapel was prepared, its windows glowing with candlelight. Helena stood at the window of her chamber, looking out at the snow-covered gardens. She could hear the faint hum of music below, the distant laughter of servants stringing garlands. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely at peace. No fear, no shame, no shadow left from the cruel joke that had once sent her here. A gentle knock sounded on her door. It was Charlotte. "It's time," she said softly. "Tomorrow is yours." Eleanor smiled, turning from the window. "Then let tomorrow come." They embraced and Charlotte left her to rest. Eleanor sat by the window a moment longer, listening to the wind against the glass, her heart steady. She did not know that far across the palace, the king sat alone by the fire, his breath shallow, his eyes heavy with fatigue. When the last candle burned low, he whispered softly, "She will lead him better than I ever did." The clock struck midnight, and the flame beside him flickered once before going out. The morning dawned pale and golden over the palace, the snow outside glinting softly under the first rays of sun. Bells rang from the chapel tower, their sound rising pure and sweet across the frosted air. Servants hurried through the corridors, whispering of joy and ceremony. The prince was to marry. The ugly daughter had become the bride of a kingdom. Eleanor awoke to the sound of those bells. For a moment she lay still, hardly believing the day had come. The gown waited beside her bed, simple, white, touched only by lace. She touched its sleeve, her heart racing. Charlotte burst through the door with her usual energy. "You're still in bed," she cried, laughing. "Half the court is already at the chapel." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I am awake, but I needed a moment to be certain I am not dreaming." Charlotte took her hands, her excitement radiant. "If this is a dream, then all of London is asleep with you. You've turned a kingdom's jest into its hope." Eleanor laughed softly. "That sounds too grand for me." "You've never understood your own power," Charlotte said, helping her rise. "But he does. And that's all that matters." Servants entered quietly, assisting her with the gown. The air was filled with the soft rustle of fabric and the faint scent of lilies. When they stepped back, Charlotte gasped. "You look, heavens, Eleanor, you look like the dawn itself." Eleanor blushed, her voice a whisper. "Do you think he will be pleased?" Charlotte's eyes softened. "He has been waiting for this moment all his life." Outside, trumpets sounded from the courtyard. The carriages were arriving. Nobles and villagers alike gathered before the chapel gates, waiting to witness what no one could have imagined months ago. Alexander stood near the altar, his breath clouding faintly in the cool air of the chapel. The light from the stained glass windows painted his uniform in colors of ruby and gold. His father's chair, draped in black velvet, stood empty beside the throne, an absence that filled the space with both sorrow and grace. Captain Grey approached quietly. "The people fill the courtyard, Your Highness. They sing as if it were a festival." Alexander smiled faintly. Let them sing. They waited too long for a reason. Grey nodded, his eyes serious. The king would have been proud. I know, Alexander said softly. He gave me this day. The doors opened at the far end and all sound fell away. The world seemed to still. Eleanor stepped into the light, her gown flowing like water, her face calm but luminous. For a moment Alexander forgot to breathe. Every whisper, every cruel word, every doubt that had ever been spoken about her dissolved in that instant. She moved toward him with quiet grace, and he saw not the timid girl sent as a joke, but the woman who had changed his kingdom's heart. When she reached the altar, he took her hands, unable to hide the tremor in his own. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I thought I knew what love was before you, but I only knew its shadow. You are its light." She looked up at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. "And I thought I was born to endure silence, but you taught me that my voice was worth hearing." The archbishop's voice filled the space. "Before God and man, this union is made not by power nor rank, but by love that endures trials and remains steadfast." Alexander squeezed her hand. "Do you, Eleanor Whitmore, take me, not as a prince, but as a man who still learns how to be worthy of you?" She smiled through her tears. "I do. And do you, Alexander of England, take her, not as a duty of the crown, but as your heart's only truth?" His voice was steady. "I do." The archbishop lifted his hands. "Then let no man put asunder what love has joined. You may seal your vows." For a heartbeat the world held its breath. Then Alexander drew her close and kissed her gently, before the crown, before the people, before heaven itself. The chapel erupted in sound. Cheers, laughter, the music of trumpets and bells mingling in joy. Outside the crowd shouted their names. Eleanor leaned against him, breathless, trembling. "They accept me," she whispered. "They adore you," he said, smiling. "And so do I." The feast that followed lasted all afternoon. The palace, once cold and austere, now glowed with warmth and light. The people from the villages were invited to dine in the courtyard, while nobles filled the great hall. Laughter and music spilled through every open window. Eleanor moved among them, her hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm. Wherever she passed, faces turned not with mockery, but with affection. Even those who had once ridiculed her now bowed low, their words awkward but sincere. "Your Grace," said Lady Travers, the same who had mocked her months before, "if I may speak, I was wrong. I see that now." Eleanor's smile was kind. "Then let us both forget what was said. The world is new today." The woman nodded, speechless with gratitude. Charlotte appeared, holding 2 golden goblets. "To the new dawn," she proclaimed. "To my brother, who learned to feel, and to my sister, who taught us all what grace means." The crowd cheered. Alexander lifted his glass, his voice steady but full. "To England's truest victory, not over enemies, but over pride," Eleanor added softly. "And to kindness, which can build what pride destroys." The hall erupted again with applause. Later, when the festivities had quieted and the guests began to drift toward the ballroom, Eleanor and Alexander slipped away through the side corridor leading to the gardens. Snow glittered faintly beneath the moonlight, and the air was crisp but gentle. She walked beside him, her hand still in his. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to belong here after all that happened." "You belonged here the moment you entered that ballroom," he said. "It only took the rest of us this long to see it." She laughed quietly. "I remember thinking I would faint before reaching the staircase that night. I remember thinking I had never seen courage more beautiful." They paused beneath the bare arch of the winter roses. The lamps along the path cast a soft light across her face. He reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "When I look at you now," he said, "I see everything I ever wanted to be." She smiled. "And when I look at you, I see everything I never dared to dream." He took both her hands, drawing her closer. "Do you remember what I promised you in the council chamber? You promised to follow me into exile," she said with a smile, "though I would never have let you." "Then let me keep another promise," he said. "I said I would marry you before the sun set after our freedom. The sun has long set, but the promise remains." Her eyes glistened. "You have kept every promise that mattered." He leaned closer, his breath warm against the cold air. "Then here is one more. Whatever storms come, you will never face them alone again," she whispered. "Nor you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, with all the tenderness of a man who had waited a lifetime for this peace. Around them, the world seemed to fade. The snow, the palace, the distant hum of music, all falling away until only they remained, two souls finally at rest. Days turned into weeks, and winter slowly yielded to spring. The kingdom adjusted to its new rhythm. Letters arrived from abroad, some with polite congratulations, others with veiled reproach. But England stood firm. Eleanor became beloved among the people. She visited the villages often, her carriage simple, her words warm. Mothers brought their children to see her, saying, "This is our queen, the one who changed the prince's heart." Alexander watched her grow into her role with quiet pride. At council meetings, he spoke of justice with new clarity, often recalling her counsel from evenings spent walking the gardens. The nobles, once dismissive, now listened with respect. One morning, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, he said, "Do you hear that?" Below, the guards were training, their voices lifted in laughter. The sound was full of life. "They used to march in silence," he said. "Now they sing." She smiled. "Then perhaps the kingdom is healing." He looked at her. "No, we are healing. Together." They stood side by side for a long moment, watching the sunlight touch the city below. In late spring, a festival was held in honor of the new reign. The palace gardens bloomed with roses, and the air was filled with music. The people filled the streets with ribbons and flowers, their joy unrestrained. At sunset, Alexander led Eleanor to the balcony overlooking the crowd. When they appeared, a great cheer rose up. He raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he said, "this kingdom has known war, loss, and pride, but today it knows love. And love, though fragile, is the strongest force of all." He turned to Eleanor. "Will you stand beside me as you always have, not as queen alone, but as my heart?" She looked out over the sea of faces, then back at him. "I have stood beside you since the day they sent me here as a jest, and I will stand beside you until time forgets our names." The crowd erupted again, chanting their names, their cheers rising to the heavens. Alexander took her hand and led her back inside, away from the noise and into the quiet of the hall beyond. The light from the balcony spilled across the marble floor, and the air still trembled with the echoes of joy. He turned to her once more. "Do you ever think of how it began?" "Every day," she said softly, "and I thank fate for every cruelty that brought me to this peace." He brushed his thumb against her cheek. "You've given me more than peace, Eleanor. You've given me meaning." She smiled. "And you've given me freedom. Then we have given each other everything." He kissed her again, slow and reverent. The moment stretched, quiet and endless, the world outside fading into the hum of the festival. When they finally drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "The jest that changed a kingdom," he murmured. She laughed through her tears. "Let them laugh if they wish. We have turned their laughter into legend." He smiled, his voice low. "And our love into truth." They stood together in the golden light, the sound of bells drifting in through the open doors, the scent of roses carried on the breeze. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, children sang in the streets, repeating the story already growing into legend. The plain girl who became a queen, and the proud prince who learned to love her not for beauty, but for grace. And as the sun sank over London, its light spilling across the city's rooftops, Eleanor and Alexander walked hand in hand through the gardens that had once known only silence. The snow was gone, the roses in bloom. The world, for once, was kind. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.